at KDK Television. Our special guest today is Professor BRYAN MENK from Duquesne University. Professor, thank you, sir, very much for being with us.
Happy to be here.
So your expertise is in tax and
Yes,
taxes. And I know you do your own taxes and you teach taxation. So let me just ask you right off the bat, why did the government postpone the April 15 tax deadline to July 15?
With all of the people who were furloughed, who were out of work, who were being kept away from their job and away from their income because of the coronavirus, the IRS and the government decided that they wanted to extend the ability of people to possibly delay filing the taxes and paying the taxes. This is the first time that it's ever happened where the IRS has extended not just the filing deadline, but the payment deadline as well. In prior years and in any other time that I've ever heard of, if you had to file for an extension, you still had to pay your taxes as of the original filing due date, typically April 15th.
Do you think that many Americans took advantage of this extension and have delayed paying their taxes?
I hope so, because, well, let me answer that with, it depends. If you were getting a refund back, hopefully you filed immediately and got that money back in your pocket as soon as you could. If you owed money, there's no incentive to pay before July 15th. Personally, I owe money this year, and I'm not mailing my taxes until next Wednesday.
Do we have any idea how many people get a refund versus those who have to pay?
It changes year to year, but typically it's about 20 to 25% of people have to pay an excess amount of money with their tax filing. And that could be due to a number of reasons. It could be that they've got investment income, interest, dividends, capital gains. Perhaps they own rental property and have rent income, or maybe they've just got a partnership interest in something. None of that is taxed with withholdings. So when you have your tax return, you have to pay the taxes on that portion. For me personally, that's why I have to pay that, and my wife and I are in different tax brackets. When we file our taxes, we mesh them together, and so we get a blended rate, which means I'm paying an extra amount of taxes for her wages that they didn't withhold.
So when it comes to paying on July 15, which is unusual, people are not going to end up paying more as a result of the delay. It's just that they're paying later.
Yes, sir. It's exactly the same amount. I had my taxes done by the middle of March, but I'm not paying them until now. And it's the exact same rate, it is the exact same dollar figure that it was in the middle of March. I just was able to hold on to my money for an extra couple of months, get interest on it, and have that available in case there was a problem.
Now, when it comes to your 2019 taxes, were there any changes in the law or anything that would make a big difference to the average person filing?
There are always changes. Most of the changes that are going to impact people are going to be indexes for inflation. So if you look at your standard deduction, whether you're single or married or head of household, that goes up every year, but it doesn't go up by very much. The biggest change we saw was the TCJA of 2017. Since then, there have been minor modifications, but it hasn't been the massive change that we saw in that 1 year. So this year, I don't think there's been that significant of a change from last year.
So pretty much the same kind of, I mean, there was a huge change a year ago.
Yes, sir.
But not this year.
Right.
Now, when it comes to these taxes that if you still don't have them done, is it possible to get another extension?
It is, but you would have to pay whatever taxes you owe as of July 15th. If you don't pay it by July 15th, you will owe interest and penalties. Now, you can still file for an automatic extension of time, but that doesn't help you if you owe money.
And that extension, I believe, is that until October 15?
Typically, it's been to October 15th. It's normally a 6-month extension. With them having delayed the filing deadline by 3 months, I have not looked into it to determine whether or not that would go to October 15th or whether that would give you a full 6 months from July 15th to say January 15th. I don't know.
No. Well, it'd be a little unusual to wait until January 15 to 2021 to pay 2019 taxes. But
I agree, but the government does strange things from time to time.
and then again, Brian, from a standpoint of getting a refund, there may be people who are filing to get a refund. I read somewhere that the IRS, a lot of their employees are working remotely, and that means there could be a delay in getting refunds now as opposed to those who filed in February. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's absolutely true. As with everywhere, I haven't been to my office and worked out of my office routinely for about 4 months. Everyone's doing that. We're all working from home. You're clearly working from home as well. We're not necessarily going to be able to do the same things that we can do while we're in the office. So while things will get done, it may take a little bit longer, but it will still happen. You'll still get your refund. It just may be a couple of extra weeks. If you do direct deposit where they will take your refund and put it directly into your account, it's still going to be significantly faster than if you get a paper check. Paper checks are always listed as being 4 to 6 weeks out from when you file. The normal turnaround time for an electronic refund is maybe 7 days. So maybe they might push it to 15 days. It's still not going to be a 6-month delay. It's going to be a little bit longer, but not drastically.
Bottom line is this July 15 date is important because if you don't file your taxes by that day, you will be subject to penalty and interest on anything that you owe. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Well, Professor BRYAN MENK from the Duquesne University, thank you, sir, very much for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm John Delano, Money and Politics Editor for KDKA Television. And our special guest is Mark STEBER, who is the Chief Tax Information Officer for Jackson Hewitt. Mark, thank you very much, sir, for being with me.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
So we are fast approaching this July 15th tax deadline. The April 15th deadline moved for about 3 months. So are your offices busy? Are there a lot of people who put off paying their taxes?
Well, it's curiously enough, yes, the answer is yes to both. A lot of people did put off doing their taxes. I think even as of last Friday or so, the most recent IRS public data, there's about 8 to 10 million folks who have not filed their taxes this year, just being level with last year as of April 15. If you had, another 1 or 2% on that, you could be even looking at a larger number. So let's just call it 10 million people still waiting to file as of about a week ago. And yes, they are starting to wake up to the fact that there will be no new extension. There'll be no new deferral. Your tax returns are going to be due next Wednesday or so on the 15th.
From what your office is experiencing, are most of these taxpayers getting a refund, or did they hold off because they owe taxes?
Curiously enough, the demographic really looks a lot like it would on April 15. 3 out of 4 are getting refunds, and a little bit higher depending on your location and certain demographics. But certainly it's mirroring what you saw on a typical April 15th and last April 15th, which is really quite puzzling. If 3 out of 4 people are getting their refunds, why haven't they filed before now? And I think it's kind of obvious, the pandemic, the COVID virus, the fear and uncertainty, unemployment to be sure, but people are being very, very, very surprised and getting pretty good refunds on a standard, normal 3 out of 4 people pattern, which is really, really quite, rewarding for folks.
I read somewhere, and Mark, you're the expert, is the IRS giving a little bit of an interest payment on some of the refunds that are given out now?
Well, yes, and that's not really just kind of a birthday gift or a nice gift. That's under the law. If the IRS has not issued a refund to a taxpayer by the statutory date, which is a few weeks after April 15th, they have some working time in there. But if you've not gotten a refund from the federal government, they are by law requiring to add a little bit. The AFR, the applicable federal rate's not that high, but it's a nice little surprise for folks that are filing who are due a refund that would have been due a refund, back in April, the statutory filing deadline.
I think I read somewhere that it was a 5% interest rate. Now, I'm not sure how that's compounded, but the bottom line is that if you're getting a refund, you might get a little extra, eh?
Little extra, John. I wouldn't expect people to go buy that big TV or that car with their refund interest payment for the couple of months that it might be there.
So if you owe money, if you owe money, again, because of the movement of the deadline, you do not have to pay extra interest or penalty, even though we're 3 months past April 15, right?
And that was a big part of the CARES Act and some of that COVID tax legislation. And for those taxpayers who did owe, that was a really nice perk, that they did not have to pay, on April 15th or face a myriad of penalties and interest, late filing, late payment, failure to pay in some cases, failure to file if you didn't file by April 15th would have been a normal penalty, and of course interest. All of that was waived up until July 15th. And that's a great point for your viewers. July 15th is the deadline now. So you do need to file. And even if you cannot pay, it's still a great idea, as always, to file. And then, of course, penalties and interest and all of that will start to accrue if, in fact, you don't follow the rules with the July 15 deadline.
Isn't it possible to get another extension? How does that work?
Well, absolutely. Under the law, and it's always been this way, you can file a Form 4868, automatic extension to file. And most states, including, just about all the states, have a sister type of an extension. And any taxpayer can get it. Even now, you can apply for it before the deadline and get an extension out until October 15. They didn't push that back. But it's important for you to viewers to know this, and we see this misunderstanding quite a bit. An extension of filing time is merely that, an extension of time to send in your paperwork. Your taxes are all still due, federal and state, by the deadline. So you kind of have to work up the computations anyway to have a valid extension. But if you need more time, and I don't know who that would be since everybody seems to have all of their forms now, you can still request an automatic extension up until 15th midnight, and you'll have another few months to file your paperwork. But you do have to pay any balance due with that extension for it to be honorable.
So the bottom line is that if you get an extension, that's for the paperwork. You still should pay your taxes by July 15, or you're going to pay penalty and interest going forward, right?
That is correct under the current law. Now, again, this pandemic has changed everything, but as it's written currently, there's no additional extension to pay your taxes. Although I will remind your viewers that you also have a little bit of extra time to pay your estimated payments for self-employed folks. They may have had an estimate due in April, had another estimate due in June if you're on a calendar basis. Those have both been pushed to July 15th as well, but those are also both now due, or you run some risk of having, underpayment penalties and failure to pay penalties.
Finally, Mark, is there any kind of help or relief for taxpayers, either from the IRS or under the CARES Act or any of these federal legislation, for people who are out of work, they're unemployed, and they're having a tough time getting unemployment benefits because the states have really messed that up. They don't have the ability to pay if they owe.
Right.
Is there any help for them from the IRS? What do you recommend folks like that doing?
Well, and that's not uncommon. It is a little larger now with about 40 million people or whatever the current number is unemployed, but there's no specific exclusion, for people who are unemployed associated with the COVID. But having said that, there's a host of options within the tax code to help people who cannot pay or who cannot pay right now, ranging from installment payments that allow you to pay a balance due over time to offers in compromise if you really just cannot pay your taxes because you're just otherwise overwhelmed with some sort of a financial situation. So in the tax code, as it's always been, and certainly in the last 10 years or so, there's a variety of provisions. What I find most taxpayers get into trouble is they just hold off and don't do anything, hoping that it'll go away, or they plan to pay at a later date when better days arrive. But there are options and actions that they should take right now to take advantage of some of those options, even if you cannot pay. For example, if you file your tax return, even if you don't have the money, you take off the table 1/3 of the penalties, which is the failure to file penalty. The penalties for failure to pay are separate. So if you file a loan and just say you owe and don't even get on an installment payment, you'll put many penalties to rest right there. But just ignoring the issue because you don't have money or you're unemployed, put yourself in even a worse situation later with compounding penalties and interest. So it's always good to seek out a tax pro. They can walk you through what your options are. They can help you set up an installment payment, or they can just get you filed and you agree to pay later, plus some penalties and some interest. But it's always good to take action by a deadline or you have risk.
Well, you sort of anticipated my last question, which is that if you find yourself in that kind of a situation, it would be good to talk to a tax preparer or someone who can assist you in this area, right?
Especially right now, the IRS, much like many companies in the United States, they're also suffering from, staffing and COVID, problems. Their call centers, although have been tremendously upgraded over the last couple of weeks, are still short-staffed to a large degree, not like they would normally be during an April tax season or even during right now with the extended tax season. They are staffing their call centers and their help centers for taxpayers, but I have found it particularly difficult to reach them once you get into the middle of the day. So getting an answer, getting some help, still kind of hard, which leads me to Tax Pros. We're up and running, extra hours, extra people, extra options. There's a lot of choices for taxpayers out there, and ignoring their tax situation here, even with, dire situational circumstances, probably not the best idea with a few days remaining.
Well, Mark Steber, the Chief Tax Information Officer at Jackson Hewlett, thank you, sir, very much for taking time and helping us to understand all this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Anytime.
I want to know who we're running from.
I do not know.
If you go outside the law,